So, Georgia Act, we are a statewide nonprofit affordable housing and community development membership organization. We are based in Atlanta, but we do our work statewide. And because I am a native of rural Southwest Georgia, I always make sure that the information, the knowledge, anything, resources that I'm able to give or provide makes it to Southwest Georgia. And as my colleague and my board member, Sherelle Bird, stated, we did have a successful housing day that we had on February the 26th. And I want to thank all of those from Albany. I think we had some competing events in Albany and in Southwest Georgia on that day. But for those who were able to make it up to the Capitol, had a great time. We had over 400 people registered to attend. Of course, it's not 450 people in the picture because the line was so long at the check-in. Everybody could not get in to get in the picture, but we did have great representation, including students from Dougherty County High School to attend and to learn because we have to also begin to pass this information along to our next generation of housing advocates and leaders. So, just to give you just a very brief analysis of the Georgia Act 2025 legislative platform, we want to defend the state low income housing tax credit because that is one of the primary methods that we use to develop affordable housing. We also advocate for establishing a permanent rental assistance program in Georgia. Unfortunately, rental prices as well as home prices are going up, but wages continue to remain stagnant. We also oppose any criminalization of those who are unsheltered and are homeless. There are other ways that we can look at helping those who are unsheltered, and we feel that locking them up and putting them in jail is not the answer. There are other ways that we could do that. We also want to advocate for a dedicated source of revenue for the State Housing Trust Fund and the State Housing Trust Fund for the homeless. Also advocating for housing assistance for those aging out of foster care. We also want to strengthen tenants' rights because we do know that a lot of our tenants are um, facing some hardships, including inhabitable living conditions. So it doesn't mean that we're anti-landlord. I also hold a real estate broker's license, as several of the colleagues in the room. I know Patricia Fletcher Edwards does also. So we're not anti-landlord, but we just want to make sure that the laws are equitable for both groups. And then we also want to make sure that we advocate and support for housing groups, including but not limited to our senior citizens. So we want to make sure that our senior citizens and veterans are taken care of, workforce housing, and something that is especially important to me is rural housing. And so every time I see the governor, I do thank him for his work in pushing for rural housing and rural workforce housing that is oftentimes left out of the conversations in Atlanta. But also, we want to support home ownership and other self sufficiency programs. We know that home ownership for many of our individuals is the single most way to build generational wealth. So, we want to advocate for more home ownership and self sufficiency programs, have incentives for nonprofit developers to build, support, and sustain affordable housing, and also support sealing eviction records within a reasonable time limit. So we understand that things happen to people. If someone gets evicted, but they have gotten back on their feet and they've reestablished themselves, that eviction record should not follow them forever. We also want to support expanded homestead exemptions for low income renters. We want to repeal the ban on rental registries. We have a lot of out of state, out of country um, people who are buying up a lot of these properties in bulk. And when something happens, we don't know who to go to help solve an issue. And so we are beginning to see this trend around the state. As a matter of fact, a few years ago was when I first saw it in Southwest Georgia. Before I even saw that it was going on in Atlanta, we were trying to help some people in an apartment complex resolve an issue, and even the property manager was like, "Please help because we don't even know who owns the property now." And then we want to support air property protections. We do know we encourage estate planning, will planning, all of that. But there is a lot of air property that is in Southwest Georgia. So we want to advocate for more resources to help alleviate heirs property so that that wealth can remain in the family. And we also advocate for transparency in rates and fees. So a lot of times this goes back to renters, that renters are paying for things that they find out after they've signed the lease. So we just want that to be transparent and upfront at the time of lease signing. So some of the legislation that we have been watching is HB 52, and I did share this with Sheena, and Sheena could definitely send this out to the attendees to expand the homestead exemption for those um, unmarried surviving spouses and their minor children of disabled veterans. So we want to make sure that we take care of our veterans and their families. That notice be given to policyholders before non-renewal of his or her homeowner's insurance policy. Being a native of rural Southwest Georgia, I know the issues with disasters and hurricanes and tornadoes, and we're getting into spring, so I always get a little nervous around springtime because we see a lot of that in our areas in Southwest Georgia. And instead of these homeowners insurance providers just not renewing the policy, and then you're scrambling trying to get insurance, that they require that this bill would require that these insurance companies give notice. We also support HB 165, which creates a new sales tax exemption for property used by nonprofit organizations. So we have a lot of nonprofit developers. There are a few in Southwest Georgia that are members of Georgia Act. And so we want to provide some tax exemptions for those nonprofits to construct, renovate, or rehab affordable housing. We also support HB 170 that establishes a Georgia Interagency Council for Homeless to coordinate a statewide approach to address homelessness. So homelessness is not just an issue in Atlanta; it is an issue throughout the state of Georgia. I am one of those persons with lived experience of being homeless. I was homeless in rural South Georgia. Um, we also support HB 399, which requires landlords who own or operate 25 or more single family or duplex properties to employ at least one in state staff member who people can get in touch with that can help manage the tenants and, and manage any maintenance requests or property related issues. All right, bear with me here. Okay, I know it seems like I'm drinking, throwing this out, you're drinking out of a water hose, but bear with me here. HB 136, which would broaden the current credit programs for contributions to support foster care and foster child support organizations. We also support HB 223 that would exclude the calculation of taxable net income for certain disaster relief or grant programs for agricultural losses due to hurricanes, including Hurricane Helene, because when our farmers and agriculture is very, very important to our economy, especially in South Georgia. So we want to make sure that those who are affected by the natural disasters receive the most relief as possible. Um, HB 240, we support that. That would prohibit unfair or deceptive in practices in consumer related transactions. HB 295 support community health workers, which that did pass over crossover day. We have a lot of people in Southwest Georgia that are community health workers, and these community health workers help connect individuals. They go to their homes to the resources that they need. We also support HB 495, which establishes the Georgia Rural Development Council, which helps provide guidance and oversee their work. And we also support HB 618, which requires sellers of real property in Georgia to disclose any known flood damage or history or insurance claims or anything in the flood. And we all know about the flood of 94 and 98 before the property is sold, leased, or otherwise transferred. Okay, now we talked about state. Now we're going to talk about some federal updates. We want to really protect HUD staffing and funding because many of our communities throughout the state of Georgia rely on HUD funding for critical housing needs and homelessness program. As some of you know, it was already hard enough to get in touch with some of the HUD staff, but we want to make sure that we're not cutting staff. Then now no one can get in touch with anyone, or there are 3, 4, 5 hour wait times to just try to get someone on the phone. So we support the highest level of HUD funding possible, including the Housing Choice Voucher Program, formerly known as Section 8, the homelessness assistance grants, prevention grants, any tribal housing, and that also includes rural housing programs, public housing operations and repairs. And we know that the federal government temporarily extended funding through March the 14th. So hopefully Congress can come together by March the 14th so that the government can remain operational. So we oppose any harmful policies that restrict housing assistance by imposing unreasonable work requirements. Now, in all of our research, people that receive public assistance for the vast majority are working. They're working poor, or they may be senior citizens, or they may be disabled. So we're trying to shift the narrative from saying that people who receive housing choice voucher programs or who are on public housing are not working. That is just not true. That has not, the research does not support that. Or unreasonable time limits that would have increase in burdens on HUD households. There's been a lot of talk in Southwest Georgia and in my hometown about the increased utility costs. So when you couple housing costs plus utilities and inflation that we're dealing with, it makes it difficult for families. And so we do want to protect that housing assistance so we won't have even more people who are homeless. Um, and again, we want to look at those programs that would help those who are unsheltered instead of arresting them or putting them in jail. Many of them face mental health issues, or just like me, when I was homeless, all I needed was a job and a place to stay, and that ended my homelessness situation. We also oppose any efforts to cut Medicaid, and we do know in Southwest Georgia that um, it's healthcare can be difficult. Many rural hospitals have closed. And we did support on the state level an expansion of Medicaid that could have been used to support our rural healthcare systems. But we want to make sure that there are no additional cuts on the federal level for Medicaid. And so we say hands off HUD. So currently, there's a proposed cut of 13 billion, and that's billion with a B, in HUD spending from the prior year. And these are national levels. So I'm going to drill down to Georgia and the congressional districts in just a minute. But they're looking at 32.14 billion to renew contracts under HUD's tenant-based rental program. Um, and even though this small increase of 3.65, I know I say small, but again, we're talking about national, would still not be enough to cover the need of voucher renewals, which would result in a loss of over 32,000 vouchers. And I won't go over all of this for the sake of time, but I want to look at something that we're definitely advocating for. It's the Section 202 program, which does support an $18 million increase from the prior year. And so Section 202, that's a HUD or Housing Choice rental assistance program that is specifically for older adults. And I am in the AARP crowd, card carrier member of the AARP. So these are things that I think about as we transition, as I said on this past Saturday, from the life cycle of housing. You know, some people when they get older or up in age may not want the responsibilities of a home. They've had a home, they've raised their children, they've done all of that. They may want to move into a elderly or near elderly complex with those supporting services and accessible housing, something that I had to have when I was looking to rent here in Metro Atlanta. I needed something on the first floor so that it would be accessible. Um, again, looking at 256.7 million for Section 811. So there are several different types of HUD programs. So this is to help people who are disabled to live in their respective communities as opposed to institutionalized settings. Because some people desire to live in their own homes and can do so if they have housing with some supportive services for those who are differently able. And again, looking at the continuums of care, we want to make sure those who are unsheltered and those organizations that are unsheltered have the funding that they need instead of this shortfall of 168 million, again, national levels to house people. We have seen a lot of issues, like I said, not just in Atlanta, it's all over Georgia, in Savannah, Valdosta, in Albany, and even again in your smaller towns where people are unsheltered. And now for those city and county elected officials, what we are really advocating for is more robust funding in HUD's community development fund. So your community development block grants, your uh, home investment partnership programs, those things that can help the elected officials and your communities to thrive. So, you could use that for housing, you could use that for home repair. I can't tell you how many calls a day, especially for people in rural communities looking for housing repair. So, we definitely don't want any cuts for that. And again, we don't want any cuts for disaster recovery. Being a native of Southwest Georgia, I know the issues that go on when we have a hurricane, tornadoes, and all those things. So we definitely don't want to lose that funding. And so when you drill down to the state of Georgia, some of the federal housing programs support over 258,000 people and over 137,000 households. And the resource and information that we have here have it broken down by congressional district. Sorry, my computer did something a little crazy, so it says ungressional district, but you get the picture. And you see it here by people, households, all programs, community development block grants, the home investment partnerships, housing choice vouchers, and the public housing programs. And again, Sheena could definitely share all of this information with you so that you can review this information for your congressional district. So, as I get ready to close, at 4 o'clock today, Eastern Time, there will be a House campaign update from our friends and partners at the National Low Income Housing Coalition from 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And they are featuring special guest Congresswoman and Ranking Member Maxine Waters, who will talk about a rally that they did outside of HUD's office to protect HUD's programs. They're also going to talk with advocates and how the shortfalls will affect their abilities of those to serve their communities. And we're also going to talk about how state and local advocates are pushing back to work towards defending affordable housing and homelessness programs that they rely on. And as you see here, this is, you can take a picture of this and register for that again today at 4 o'clock Eastern Standard Time so that you can hear directly some of the efforts going on in Congress and going on in DC. And just a couple more things. Again, we want to ask Congress to stop the cuts to Medicaid. Over 70 million people rely on Medicaid. 70% of people who are in 60% of people who are in nursing homes rely on Medicaid, and 7 million recipients over 65 needed to supplement Medicare, and 11 million of the recipients are between um, 50 and 64. And again, we're talking about low insurance, low provides insurance for low income people with disabilities, including children and senior citizens. So we want to make sure that our rural healthcare systems who will be impacted the most um, are helped, as well as our individuals. And SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, over 41 million people rely on SNAPs. SNAP benefits, the vast majority are working people, are working poor, and senior citizens. I know several senior citizens come to me and say, "Hey, I'm only getting $50 a month. I'm only getting $64 a month," and they have to rely on food banks and other things to help them. And so the average benefit per person per family is $212 in SNAP benefits. And we also again know that SNAP is very important to our farmers who provide those vital service to us to feed Georgia and our nation. So here's our staff contact. You can take a picture of that. And if you have any questions, please feel free to send us an email and follow us on social media. So thank you so much for your time and attention.